I'm Gail Steele, Herr. I'm the daughter of Jane and Gordon Herr. And see, I get upset just thinking about it. Isn't that interesting? It was a traumatic life at the farm. And my father and mother, and especially my father, had this dream of creating a Bauhaus in a rural area so that artists could work and teach and sell their artwork. And I gather the Bauhaus did the same kind of thing and attracted incredible artists everywhere. So when I was 1 year old, my parents went to Europe, and they went, I don't know all the story, but they did go to Halle to meet Marguerite and ask her if she would be willing to come to California to help start this new Bauhaus. And it's important to remember that at that time, it was World War II, and all of the artists that came were Jewish, and Jewish people were kicked out of schools everywhere, including Marguerite at the Bauhaus, and everybody had to get out. And so when there was an opportunity to get out safely with a concept of where to go, she was the first to go. And that's how it all started. My father then wanted to go around the world. And my mother was pregnant with my brother. And so she came home with me, pregnant, and my father started out right when the World War II started. So he couldn't go around the world. But he wrote many, many letters. My parents wrote a lot of letters. And in those letters, he tells all about his dream and his thoughts and everything. So that's where this all started from. And then I don't know exactly when everybody got there, but first it was Marguerite. In fact, there's a place in Guerneville that was called Murphy's Ranch. And we lived down there in a house while my father was building our house. And the road is exactly the same as it is today, but it wasn't paved. And so my mother was always getting stuck in the mud. And actually the car one time went off the road. And so they built a house. We didn't have electricity. We didn't have water. They had to bring water from what we called North 40 and built the house. And then Marguerite came after that, and he helped her build her house. My father was a very multifaceted person, and there's a lot that I don't know why he wanted to do this. But he was multi-talented in the art field. He have a picture of him making a mosaic. I have beads he made for my mother out of clay. He was an architect. I don't think he was a licensed architect at that time, but he was an architect. And he had multiple talents and had a very difficult personality as well. But he had this dream of making a place for artists. My father never talked about how he got where he got. And so I can't really know and often wonder what in his background made him come up with this idea. I just don't know the answer. And it might be in the letters that he wrote to my mother. But there's so many of them, I haven't read them all. My mother, on the other hand, she had a master's in economics, which to me was very odd. She wanted to be a writer, but I think she loved my father's creativity. She loved the idea of going back to the land, of creating everything from the beginning. And they were able to buy this land from the people who homesteaded it, the Walkers who were there. So they homesteaded that land. So my father built this pretty small house, and Marguerite's house was even smaller. And it's interesting to think how someone can live in such, today, even if you go and see that house, it's very, very small. And so...
Well, backtrack even farther. I mean, tell me, who was your mother? What was her background?
Well, my mother My mother was raised in San Francisco. She came from an old, well-known family in San Francisco. Her father was one of 11 children that came. They came from Germany. They were all German Jews, and my grandfather was a lawyer, and the others went into the coffee business, MJB Coffee. My mother was not in that business, and my grandmother was very open-minded and progressive. However, I don't know that she was so progressive she wanted her daughters not to marry nice Jewish boys, but neither one did. And I think she didn't have that in mind. But so she came from an enlightened background of families that are very generous, and incidentally generous to the arts. There was a huge art interest in that family. Not just my grandmother and grandfather particularly, but in the extended cousins and aunts and uncles and things like that. And they were very involved in their community, and they come from a whole group of people there in San Francisco like that. But my mother, evidently, they wanted to go back to the earth. And my father was extremely difficult. I think my mother died when I was 15. So I didn't have the opportunity to get into knowledge of why, but the person that she loved in literature was D.H. Lawrence. In fact, I was a baby, when they went down to meet Frida, D.H. Lawrence's wife. And I have a picture of
You mean Diego Rivera?
No, D.H. Lawrence.
There's a different Frida. Yeah.
Yeah, there is a different Frida.
Okay, keep with the story.
Yeah, there's a different Frida. But there's a connection. I think if one read all of D.H. Lawrence's books, you probably would be able to figure out where she was. She was, and why she loved doing what she was doing, knowing how hard it was to live like that. I mean, she had an acre vegetable garden. She canned fruit. She canned everything we had. And we also had a big garden around the house. But, even then, water was always a problem. And we had to get water from what we call the North 40, and we had a big tank up on the hill. They pumped the water up to the tank and used the water. And, we had a septic tank in the house. Eventually, we got a generator. So we had electricity through